Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Always glad to be talking education, comics, literacy. And on this episode, I'm talking with fellow educator and comics pop culture enthusiast, Eric Kallenborn. Eric, thank you for joining.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad to be here and excited to talk all things comics, pop culture in the classroom.
Absolutely. You have a lovely sort of like garden house, I don't know, greenhouse background happening here. I love it. The ideas are just growing. I see Murakami back there. So
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
yeah,
you. I have lots of plants behind me actually. This is it's kind of in our dining room. And I'm like, I never
okay.
recorded here. And this is like I'm sitting at the dining room table, and this is like the wall behind me. So we have like this huge gallery wall in our house. This Murakami print, he actually had a show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago that was
Nice.
absolutely amazing. So glad I got to go to that. And this was a print they were selling at the show. And interesting fact, I haven't been able to find this because I was like, is this print like this has been a few years now? Is it like worth anything? Are people selling it? Not that I would ever sell it. I love it, but I can't find it. Like I can't
Well,
eBay, the internet, like I can't find this thing at all. So I might have the only one. This might be the I doubt it. I doubt it. But it's really cool. So I'm happy I got this here. And my wife and I are huge plant people. So over COVID, we started gardening a ton and just having tons of house plants around. So that was our sourdough bread, if you will, was just propagating plants.
nice, nice. That's a good sourdough bread. That's a good sourdough bread. Yeah. And speaking of arts, I know that you're someone who integrates arts, pop culture into everything you do with the classroom and beyond. Where did your interest in comics and art stem from, if I may use a plant metaphor?
You mean like when I was you mean like from the roots
From the roots, from the way back to the foliage.
to extend that? Well, we'll just keep this metaphor going the whole time. So,
That's right.
comics, I'm an only child, right? I'm an only child. So growing up, I was always looking for just things to keep my mind busy, right? Because my dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he was a little bit removed and withdrawn a lot of the time. So I had to keep myself occupied, had to keep myself busy, and I started drawing from an early age and coloring from an early age just because it was fun. It was, when you're a kid, drawing, you don't care how bad or good it is. It's just like everything you draw is kind of cool and fun. So I started drawing even when I was young. And then my dad would take me to this candy store. We lived on the south side of Chicago, back of the yards neighborhood. And there was this candy slash comics shop called Sandy's Candies. And we would take a walk over there. And there was this, I would get like Tom and Jerry comics and, I would get like funny comics. But then I started getting into like, there was this comic called The Nam, and it was done by
Hmm.
Marvel, and it was about soldiers in Vietnam. And I don't know if I would have picked it up. I mean, I might have because my dad was a soldier, so I kind of like was interested in that. But that was a way for us to bond. So like we would read that. I was probably too young to be reading that now that I think about it. But reading it with him and kind of talking about it kind of opened him up about his experiences in the war a little bit, and then got me to connect with him a little bit in ways that I wasn't in the past. So then from there, I started picking up a lot of like, it was into G.I. Joe. So I started picking up the G.I. Joe comics and um, got into a little Batman. I was into DC before I got into Marvel superheroes, which was a little bit later, but Spider-Man was probably my first favorite Marvel superhero. Um, Loved Spider-Man, loved the fact that he was like a local kid, like doing good in his neighborhood and in his community, which is kind of like I think what drew me to Batman as well, because although he's a billionaire, he kind of does good for his city. Like he's kind of like, I'm going to take care of this city is mine. And they're both, I mean, with the exception of this radioactive spider bite, they're both relatively human, in the way where like at least Peter Parker was before he got bit, and Batman, Bruce Wayne is. So I love this idea of these like normal people doing extraordinary things to protect their communities. And I think even as a kid, I recognized that as something special. So from there, it just like I got away from comics for a long time, like maybe in my late teens, early mid 20s. And then as I became a teacher and developed a lot of like nerdy friends in my profession. People started saying, "Hey, you need to get back into comics. Comics are like really good right now." So then my buddy Ronald Whitaker told me to read Lock and Key. So I read Lock and Key, and that was like my comic back into comics, right? That IDW Joe Hill written book, and I absolutely loved it. My wife and I were on a road trip in California when I started it, and I was stopping at comic book shops along the way to pick up the next volume, and I was reading it at the hotel every night as we were on this road trip because I was like, and then she read it, and we just absolutely loved it. And then that's kind of how like my love for not necessarily like education, that's a different story, but just
Mhm.
kind of how I developed as like a comics guy, just kind of like you are what your friends are into as well. And a lot of my friends read a ton of comics, so eventually you're going to read those things. But I think that, when I think of pivotal moments, I think of reading comics with my dad, and then I think of just like sharing them with friends.
Yeah, cool, cool. Speaking of sort of ordinary folks doing amazing things for communities, my next question has to do with teaching. I'm curious about, from that personal kind of renaissance of comics, how comics, fandom, gaming, excuse me, how did that enter your teaching? And I'm also thinking about this quote that you had, which is uh, never hug yourself in the classroom, that you shared when we met in Denver. So I'm curious about what you might add about that as well.
I wish I could take credit for that. That was, I went to a gaming conference, a gaming and education conference a bunch of years back. And the one thing I remember that stood out to me that I'm taking with me into the future was this idea that the person running it was like, you can't teach the things you love as much as what the kids are into, right? Because if you hug yourself and like hold on to those things that you find dear, a lot of the times your students aren't going to respond to those things because they're dear to you, not them. And that's
Mhm.
the pinnacle idea of like why you shouldn't hug yourself as an educator, why you should really find out what your kids are into, get your pulse on what's happening in their lives, in their cultural, worlds, so you can tap into that and engage them in ways. I tell this story sometimes where because I'm a big Magic the Gathering fan. I play Magic the Gathering since 1994. I've been playing on and off, and I thought, well, how cool if I bring that into my classroom. So this was back in the day when Wizards was giving out sample decks if you contacted them. So I was in a couple conversations with Wizards of the Coast, and they sent me this giant box of Magic cards for free. And I was like, this is great. So I decided I was going to teach my kids how to play this game. And then we were going to create like a set based off of a book we were reading. And that was going to be
Mhm.
part of this. And there's going to be a lot of write ups about it and rationalizations about it in my head. I mean, not in my head, it would be a really cool activity for people that were into Magic the Gathering. What I quickly found was a lot of my students did not care about Magic the Gathering. And I'll never forget it. This one girl was like, she raised her hand and she said, Kallenborn, I just don't care about dragons. And I was like, wow, I never thought anybody couldn't care about dragons in my head because I was just holding on to those things that like I think is cool and that I love. But that was an eye-opening moment for me where I'm like, yeah, okay, so we stopped it. And I asked the class, and it was like only maybe 25 or 30% of them were into it. And the rest of them
Mhm.
were just like, this is just some nerd stuff that I don't care about. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, let's see if we can find some nerd stuff that you do care about, right? Because everybody nerds out about something. So that was, there's been a couple moments where I'm like, that really altered my view of, some teacher would have just said, well, this is what we're doing. We're going
Right.
to do this because I see that the educational value is here. So we're going to do this. And if you don't like dragons, it's fine, but we're going to do this. And I was like, no, I stopped. It's like, this isn't working for all of us. So I'm not going to push this. I'm not going to make you hate education. I'm not going to make you hate things. So I switched gears, and I think that's something as good educators must do is that when you realize something isn't working, you got to hit that brake pedal and switch gears, or else you're not going to have that community in the classroom that you could have, especially today when there's so many distractions, constant distractions. If you can't be a part of curating quality stuff for those students, you're going to lose them pretty quickly. So that's kind of the basis of hugging yourself. And then when I came over, when I moved to Oak Lawn High School, I was teaching a comic creation class. I taught a comic class at Shepherd High School as an English elective for seniors. So we read, analyzed, wrote about comics. And then I had an art class at Oakland that was like creating comics. And I wanted to get into teaching a manga because I knew all the kids were into manga. So it was COVID and we were on a Zoom call. And I was like, well, what book, what book should we read? Like, what book should we read as a class? And they had this like wonderful discussion in the Zoom room without me even having saying a word. And they're talking, they're in the chat, they're saying stuff out loud, and they ultimately came up with a book that would be appropriate, engaging, really well received by all the students, and it was Full Metal Alchemist.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a Friday. So that day I ran out and I got the book. It was like the first one I think I got was like the first three volumes in one. It was like a compendium. And I read it and I was like, my God, this is so good. I never even heard of it at that point. Like now it's touted as it not even then it was touted as one of the best anime slash manga of all time. It makes tons of top 10 lists, but I never even heard of it. And I'm like, how many of these things are out here that are not only brilliant, but that the kids love that I should know about if I'm going to be
Yeah.
teaching teenagers, right? And that got me like talking to them constantly about like what else should I be reading? What else should I be watching? And then we started trading books. So they start giving me manga to read. I start giving them American comics to read. And we're talking about them and we're just reading tons of stuff. And in my classroom, I had free read Fridays for a lot of the weeks when we didn't have like major assessments happening where the students could just read whatever they wanted to, whatever comic, graphic novel, manga they wanted to, Fridays. We just relaxed and read, no assignment attached to it, nothing. It was just developing a community of readers that we shared books. And that I think is imperative to building that community, which is just like finding an inroad that everybody can kind of relate to. They didn't all love it, but more kids loved that than they did Magic the Gathering. I'll say that because they had they could pick their books. And I would book talk 5 books a day because I've read so many now, comics, manga, everything that I will book talk 5 a period, just 30-second, here's the pitch of this book. If you want to borrow it, here's my sign out sheet. And every period almost I have kids checking out books from me.
Love it. Love it. I love that idea of building book community and uh, the idea that you don't necessarily have to have something that's attached to it if you're engaging with it, if you're making that choice. What should parents, colleagues, teachers know about comics, gaming, these types of texts that we're talking about?
Well, as you know, as well as I do, and anybody who has kind of spent a lot of time wanting to work with these medium with students, there's a lot of pushback. It's less and less, but there has been pushback from administrators, from other colleagues, from parents. You know what, though? I'm going to be honest with you. When we're asked this question at conferences or Comic Cons, wherever we are, I have
Hmm.
not received a lot of pushback from parents. It's actually been the exact opposite. I'll hear from parents who say thank you for introducing my student to reading, because
Yeah.
a lot of the time their gateway into reading everything is a manga or a graphic novel that just hooked them in and they loved it so much. I had a kid, I'll never forget this, maybe about 10 years ago now, who he was a senior. Sorry, my dog's barking over here. He said that he was a senior. He said he never read a book before, and he read every Miles Morales issue and graphic novel I had had.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. So he came to me and thanked me because he had never read a book and he had read every Miles Morales comic I had. And then he started asking me for other recommendations. So I was giving him other comics. I was giving him some short stories to read because I wasn't just going to throw him into like a full length novel. Never read a full book in his career in high school, and it was great. It was great. So I'm getting parents who thank me those stories, right? I think the
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
that need the most convincing sometimes are colleagues.
Yeah.
I found mostly, I mean, I did have one administrator in the past that did not believe in comics in the classroom, but for the most part, My administrators have been really cool over the buildings I've taught in, and it's been my colleagues that sometimes are like, "Well, what this ain't a real book, this isn't real literacy," and sometimes it just takes giving them the right book to say, hey, you know what? Here's a couple titles that are not what you think comics are. Like, I know you think they're just Batman and Superman. Um, First of all, there's some awesome Batman, Superman stuff that's really high level, but here's some stuff that you can read that will kind of change your mind on what this medium is. And that's worked for me a little bit, right? Especially when I'm trying to extend these olive branches, but
Mhm.
more importantly, when the teachers see the kids super involved and engaged in a piece more than they would be just listening to another version of a classic piece of literature played on YouTube while the kids are just following along in their book. Like that is to me some of the worst. I don't know. There's so many teachers out here that are just like playing YouTube audio while the kids are just following along, and that goes on
Yeah.
for like weeks at a time. And it's like it's 2025. It's almost 2026. There has to be better ways to engage students in this current climate. And I think when they see students really getting into these books and discussing these books, comics and graphic novels as if they were works of literature, analyzing character decisions and what some of the artwork does, why a character says something over something else. Those are the things that start convincing colleagues a little bit more. And especially when they go to conferences and they're seeing like there's plenty of programming on this medium at all major conferences, educational conferences, because people see the value in it. And I think the further we go, if people aren't seeing that value, it's like, well, you're kind of in the minority now. Like you're this sort of this ancient artifact that maybe is still teaching out of a binder you were teaching it from in 2002, and maybe we change it up a little bit. For your kids' sake, stop hugging yourself. Once again,
Yeah.
bringing it back to that, right? So those are the ways. I think I kind of got to answering that question there, which is like dealing with. It really helps too, and this is when we talk about. I know one of the questions was about resources for
Mhm.
teachers and educators, and just people who are trying to maybe teach with these books or learn more about them. I think one thing that works for me the most is having a collection of like-minded friends in education that I can also say, hey, I need a book that does this, or what should I be reading now? What's like a really good deep story that I can get into that I can read. If you don't have a lot of comics friends or a small group even, I don't have a lot, but I have a small group of dedicated comics buddies that will turn me on to new titles, that will show
Mhm.
me things the medium is doing that I didn't know it was currently doing. And I think that's my biggest advice for people who are looking to get into teaching comics and graphic novels is read a ton and find people that have read a ton and ask them what you should be reading. And I think
Yeah,
that goes a long way.
absolutely. And it's that literacy community that you were talking about, the way it's really meant to be. Readers talking to readers and engaging with texts.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. You went to the olive branch metaphor, so returning to our plant and uh, vegetation metaphor. Thinking about the way you branched out to professional development, I'm curious about that. We've talked a little bit about C2E2. I know we met in person at NCTE, so anything that you'd like to share about the work that you've done in developing resources and sharing these with educators. And I should ask you about improv too.
Yeah, so I'll tackle all of that by saying one of the coolest things about over the years just going to these conferences is just like how many people that have reached out after and said, "Hey, that was awesome. Do you have any other resources for me? Do you have titles I can read? Do you have, whatever you have, I would love to." And there's been some people who have reached out maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago who I'm still like emailing comic titles to. Like they're telling me what they're reading and I'll respond to, "Hey, try reading this." So making those connections, building that community has been absolutely fantastic. But I think one thing too about those conferences, especially like NCTE or ALA, bigger educational conferences in a way, it's like people need to see that they're not on an island, that we go to C2E2 as well. Like we're able to, through my school district, we're able to offer educational credits, professional development credits for the teachers who come to our programming on that Friday of C2E2. So when these teachers show up and they can tell their school district, hey, this isn't just a Comic-Con. Like we're through this high school, they're offering credits. Like we get professional credits for going to this thing. It is, we are learning stuff about the classroom, and all of the presentations that we offer these credits for, I clear through my principal. So I sit down with her and I'm like, hey, here's the things we're doing. Do you have any suggestions? Do we need any of this to change in order to do what would you like to see here? So I work with my administration to make sure that all of the programming we put on is like approved by us and that they're going to get some quality programming, the teachers that come. So when they do come to whatever sessions we're creating, as people who wanted this programming when we were younger teachers, we're able to kind of alter our message to that, but also, they show up and they see, hey, I'm in a room with 300 other people that want to learn more about this, that might learn more about this. We've done a panel before, which was just like it was an AMA panel where people could just show up, ask us questions, but also like respond to each other and ask each other questions. So we just did
Yeah.
a room of all of these educators for here's an hour of time for all of these comics interested teachers with varying levels of experience from never tried it to 20 years. Let's just talk about what works and what doesn't work and what we've learned over the course of our careers. And seeing people show up and engage in those conversations is just a cool place to do that. It's hard to do that on a Zoom's great. And like when I've been a part of a lot of like, especially when COVID, when we did some like New York Comic Con, we did some Zoom panels for them, educational Zoom
Mhm.
panels, and they were awesome. But when you're in a room with people and you can actually like talk to each other and then hang out for a little bit after the session and talk more and exchange info and maybe even get a bite to eat with people, there's something about that in-person camaraderie and exchange of ideas that's really good. The improv, me and my buddy Jason went through the Second City Improv School a long time ago now. It'll be 15 plus years. And we decided to immediately bring an improv team to our school that we were teaching at together at the same time. And it was amazing. Like those kids we had like, we were so lucky. I mean, the educators out there that have like, if you've coached, like I did forensics, I coached speech for a long time as well. And sometimes you just get a group of kids that is just phenomenal. And when we started with this improv group, we got lucky. And for a bunch of years, we had really dedicated kids that wanted to get good at improv. And we would have shows where these kids were just killing it. They were just so good. So then I started bringing some of those improv games like into my classroom. And I was like playing these games with my students, but more for communication. Like there's a lot of games where it just focuses on like focusing on listening and responding. So we weren't trying to make each other laugh. We weren't trying to create scenes per se. I was using improv in my class to get students listening and responding to each other.
Mm.
And also acting a little bit silly, to be okay acting a little silly in front of each other. Because if you can act silly in front of your classmates, then you're more likely to speak in front of them about whatever the content may be. So then Jason and I started taking these improv ideas and bringing them to conferences. And we started doing improv sessions, workshops for teachers. We just did one at NCTE this past year or past month. It was so good, so fun. We've done them at uh, New York Comic Con. We've done them in Chicago. We do them whenever we can. And like the teachers, we've done them for students. Like we have done improv workshops for students at schools in the past too. I'm open for doing them for staff as well. Like there is no wrong way to introduce the skills of improv to a group of people in a school.
Yeah.
And, and we're not talking about putting on performances, right? We're talking about just using these skills of listening, responding, saying yes, adding on to somebody's idea. Like there's so many things improv does that's not just standing up there looking for a punchline. And I think when
Mhm.
people hear that idea, that oh improv, like oh we're just going to be like doing a show, a bunch of scenes. No, that's not. Especially if you're brand new to it, you're just going to learn how to talk to people and how people can respond back to you. And in this day and age too, where it's harder and harder, especially after COVID, for students to put down their devices and engage in conversation. And adults as well. I mean, we've all been in professional development where the adults can't get off their phones, just like the
Yeah.
students can't. We all need to relearn a little bit what it means to communicate with each other. And I think the improv does that really well. And if I could have a class, if I could just snap my fingers and add an English class to the school, I would add an improv course that students had to take as a speech class, because I think that would be a really valuable asset and make that more professional development in schools too, like for teachers. It would really get them to open up more. Plus, we don't know the people in our building as much. Like I've been at my school now for this is my seventh year at this school, and I know a lot of people in my building, but there's still a lot of people that don't know me that I don't know, and something like that really can create more of a bond to get people to know each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much in the human response, and there's this kind of really interesting movement of like comedy and horror and all of these kind of genres that get to the gut of who you are that seem to be making a lot of headway right now, which is good. It's good to see people talking about horror, comedy, comics, media, and how those connections get to be made. It's a cool trend. I follow this trend.
In my comics class, we do a short, funny comic, like a comic strip. It's
Mhm.
usually like 3 to 5 panels, however the students want to work it out. And we talk about like what it takes to write a joke. How do you set up a joke? How do you create the setup for a punchline? And like what is the punchline? What are the types of punchlines there are? And it's really interesting to teach a group of people who have never thought about writing comedy what goes into that, right? So just like improv or horror too, like what makes how do you give somebody the chills when they're reading something? It works a muscle that we generally don't work, right? And we watch a lot of comedy, stand-up comics, sitcoms, but do we all really know what goes into kind of writing a really good joke? And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do. So I love kind of teaching that too for this, those same reasons, like just exposing students to a type of writing or thinking a way that they have not in the past.
Yeah. And huge shout out to cartoonists who do that in
Mhm.
syndicated strips like on a daily basis in 3 or 4 panels, landing a joke. That is impressive work.
Absolutely. Yeah, some
Yeah.
of we all used to love I think you find the comics kids by the person who would go to the Sunday Funnies section of the
Yeah.
paper first.
Absolutely.
Those far sides are like the fact that that could be done in one panel, right? The fact that like those I've tried to write jokes in a single panel, and it is really hard to do. And
Yeah.
Larson was like genius at it.
Yeah. And you had the Phantom, you had Prince Valiant, these like action adventure, Flash Gordon, these science fiction action adventure stories. So it's a huge gateway as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a final question on the list, which you've already referenced in some ways with resources. I always like to think of these talks as being something that people can find years later and look back at. And I'm curious about any resources that you've tapped into, any spaces that you would go or direct people to if they want to find out more about the kind of teaching and topics that we've been talking about.
That's yeah, I that's a big question, right? I used to have a website. My website kind of ran its course. I wish I would have kept it up. I had a lot of resources on there, and I had a page with links to other teachers who did this. But what I found the most is, as I mentioned earlier, really just reaching out to people and asking them like, where do they go and what do they do for their resources? Like I go to NCTE has a lot of awesome resources as well. Like there's a single sheet comics um, vocabulary sheet. It's one handout, two sides that goes over like all the basics of like panel, gutter, bleed, graphic weight, all of the major terms you're going to need to know if you've never taught comics before. And I think that's a great place to start, which is just searching this NCTE graphic novel. No, it's not definitions. It's like if you just type in like graphic novel, yeah, words NCTE, it's like the first thing that pops up, and it's a PDF. You download it two-sided. I always start with that whenever I'm teaching comics, just to get the kids the basis of what is the language we need. Because I think if you're going to teach this thing, you need to have the language to talk about that. And I also recommend Scott McCloud's Teaching Comics. I think that book is it just does such a wonderful job of telling. That's a great book to give somebody who is skeptical about comics to a skeptical administrator or colleague. Um, you just give them that book, that Scott McCloud book, and it's an academic look at what comics are and what they do. I think that book is anybody who's going to be teaching comics should probably have read that. I think it's a must read for people who are like us who want to do that. And I think anybody you talk to anybody who has taught comics long enough, they've read it as well. Like it's one of those you have to do. Besides that, just building that community of comics buddies. Build that community and find people who are willing to chat with you, to offer recommendations, because there's so many people doing book reviews out there. There's so many people where it's just like, where do you start? And if you don't know where to start, it can be overwhelming and daunting beyond belief. And going into a bookstore and just saying, hey, I'm looking for comics to teach. Bookstore owners and comic shop owners they don't think in the way of like, they may have a section for kids. They may have a kids section in a local comic book shop, but they generally don't have a shelf with like books to teach with resources to teach those books. You might find that at a library. You might have a library, you might have a shelf for like if there's a local high school or middle school that has a summer reading list or a reading list, and the kids are like, well, these are the books that the schools in the area are reading. But even that is rare to find just out in the open. So that's why I think you need to have that. You need to have that group of people who are going to push you in the right direction. So um, maybe I can add some links to the comments in here once we it gets
Yeah.
going. Because it's there's depends on what you need too, right? Because like when I'm writing, because I'll have my students like write a comic script, so they'll have an idea of what they want to do, like a two-page comic before they draw anything. If it's an English class, maybe they don't draw because it's an English class. And unfortunately, a lot of students, if they're in high school, are like, I can't draw. And people will say that
Hmm. Hmm.
everybody can draw. But what I would have my students do is script comics. Like, well, what does it look like in your head? Let's write the script as if we were going to be handing this to an artist and they were going to create this. But there's no industry standard for comic book scripts. There's an industry standard for TV scripts. There's an industry standard for movies, but there is none for comics because it's all about how the artist and the writer and the inker and the letterer, how they work together. And if they come up with a way that's good for them, then that works for them. But if you just Googled, like I could put a link that says, here's a link to some really good like sample comics pages. But that link that's just Googleable. Like there's hundreds of sample comic pages and full comic book scripts that are out there from all these different writers. So I think that's a good idea too for people to if they want to see like what a comic script looks like, because a lot of people these aren't made in a vacuum, right? Unless you're one of the auteurs who kind of writes and does your own work, you're still thumbnailing all that out anyway. But you want to find a book where there was a writer and then there's a team of artists who kind of create that vision, and just kind of seeing how a comic book script works is a really cool way for teachers to kind of get an idea of the process of how the book is made, but also an idea of like an interesting writing assignment for your students. Because we tend to think like, oh, we have to teach students how to write a 5 paragraph essay. But let's be honest, like yeah, yes, it's important. It's 100% important to learn how to develop an argument, to transition between your arguments and your points, 100%. But when you get higher in education in like high school, what about our students who aren't going to be English majors, or maybe they're going into the trades, right? A lot of these students who are going into interesting careers, they don't maybe need to write a 5 paragraph essay, but they'll have to write something that they haven't written before. They'll have to write it in a way they haven't written it before. So giving students an experience of writing like a comics script in a very specific way, you're kind of showing them how to do it. It gets them writing technically. And technical
Mhm.
writing, I don't think we do that enough as English teachers. We
Yeah.
tend to stick to just like this narrative sort of, here's a book, let's write an argument about this book. But what about having a unique technical writing assignment in our classes? And I think writing a comic script does that really well. So being able to just Google comic book scripts, you're going to find thousands of them out there like that. I rely on Google more than I probably should for finding things like that. But there's so much now, right? There's just
Mhm.
so many links that you can find that are helpful. That also back to the comics buddies. If there's something I can't find, I know 3 people right now I could text that will tell me where I can find something.
Cool, cool. Yeah, yeah. And we have these amazing resources. It would be a shame to teach in exactly the same way across a long span of time, just because we have so much that's changing in our world and so many resources that we can tap out to. And I'll also mention a resource that I used just a few weeks ago. And your ears might have been burning because I was calling this set of questions the Kallenborn questions. And I was
Oh,
having students, yeah, having students check out a comic series that you and I worked on materials for, and I gave them those books, and I said you can actually use these with virtually any book. So I had some students using their chosen reads, and some students using the comic series Great Immigrants, Great Americans, and so I titled it the Kallenborn question. So you have been made famous at least in my classroom.
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, working on those resources for Great Immigrants, Great Americans was really cool through NCTE. But once again, like those resources are on the NCTE website, right? And a
yeah,
lot of it, from what I found too over the course of doing this works with comics over the past 10, 15 years. Like Ronell Whitaker and I keynoted NCTE with Gareth Hines, with the graphic novelist Gareth Hines a bunch of years back. And
yeah.
since then, the amount of comics resources on the NCTE website has just exploded too. Like they have some really, really great resources on that website, including the Kallenborn questions, which it's
Yes,
a set of questions that you can use with any comic or graphic novel you choose.
that's right. That's right. Well, many thanks, Eric. I'm sure the conversation will continue. I'm glad to have you back on here anytime you want to talk about teaching and fandom things, and may our work cross over in many ways to come.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for, and anybody out there who's looking to plant these seeds of comics in their classroom. I hope this helps them, get a little bit of an idea of how they can grow and flourish in this environment.
Nice callback. We love the callback. Absolutely.